A breakfast series. I'm Denise Hollywood, the Executive Vice President of the Air Force Association, and on behalf of our President, General Spencer, who is very sorry he could not be here today, again, welcome to this beautiful view and a beautiful morning here in the DC area. I'm very pleased this morning to introduce our speaker, the Vice Chief of Staff for the Air Force, command pilot with more than 4,500 flying hours and 680 combat hours. He has led bomber, ISR, aeromedical evacuation, and airborne command and control in support of Operations Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, and Combined Joint Task Force Horn of Africa. He's a huge proponent of innovation inside the Pentagon and has spearheaded many efforts to lead the Air Force towards outside-the-box thinking. General Wilson is here with us today to talk about innovation and exploring the competitive space among private-public partnerships. It's my honor to welcome General Wilson to the stage. Thanks very much.
Well, good morning, folks. It's a real treat to be here. On behalf of the Secretary-in-Chief, who would probably love to be here, and I would love for them to be here in my place. So here we are in D.C., in the middle of policy and budget stuff going on, right after an election and just before the holiday sprint, right? So not much going on, yeah. But what's great to see is a bunch of friends and a bunch of folks who are engaged in the team sport and the team sport of national security. And thank you for all you're doing in those endeavors. So let me speak about teamwork and team sport. 5 weeks ago, 35 days ago, down at Florida, we had Hurricane Michael come through. Hit Mexico Beach in the Tyndall area. And as you know, everybody here, we continue to mourn for all those that we lost down there, to help rebuild the lives and families that are been affected by there. And while we got the jets flying elsewhere, I think to put in perspective, the recovery there at Tyndall isn't going to be measured in days and weeks. It's going to be measured in months and years, right? So it's going to take a united effort to see it through, and I can tell you we're going to be united to see it through. And let me spin on that, because that's, I think, indicative of what I think we're going to need to do as a nation moving forward in the future in this great power competition, is be united across our whole of government in this competition. So let me try and zoom out a second just to tell you the context that I'll start from. If I were to go back in the human history, and I would go back to the Romans all the way through probably 100 years ago, I would say fundamentally not a lot changed during that time. They had some different things, but life for the average person wasn't remarkably different in the year 00 as it was in 1860. But I contend the last 100 years have been completely different. And I look back and think my grandparents wouldn't even recognize the world that we live in right now. And my mom and dad are having a hard time keeping up with all the changes in technology. And forget my mom and dad, I'm having a hard time keeping up with technology, about how things are changing, and they're changing on this exponential pathway. So said another way, we kind of marched along the slow, steady progress, and now we hit this inflection point, and it's straight up. And I've talked about, and many of you probably heard me talk about this Uber disruption taking place, or I call it a quadruple convergence that's happening politically, economically, socially, and technologically across lots of different areas, and it makes for a really disruptive time right now, and a very challenging time. But as our chief also says, with every challenge comes lots of opportunities, and I think that's another thing that we need to look through that lens of opportunities. So let's just take a second as I talk about those Uber disruption. Let's also not forget the good things that have really happened that we've seen in this last century that have been unparalleled. Life expectancies are going up across the globe. We got equalities going up across the globe, education being opened up across the globe, open governments happening across the globe. So lots of good things happening, and they've happened against a backdrop of the last 100 years where we've had fascism, communism, and terrorism all trying to interrupt that. And yet, with the help of the people in this room and the people from across our nation and academia, industry, and we've defeated that and made great strides. Over the last 25 years, so I think a couple nations in particular, China and Russia, have been watching while there hasn't been a great power competition, or we didn't feel there was a competition, and they've been studying us immensely, and they've been looking at ways to negate our advantages and seeking to take advantage of this time of change to impose what I call changes in the world order that would be not congruent with our values or our nation's security. And so that's our challenge in front of us, I think. Some of you have also heard me talk about, because we are focused elsewhere and we are focused on violent extremists and not in a great power competition, I talked about it, I call it a two problem. So bear with me for a second. You got a left-handed Aggie bomber pilot up here. Doing math in public is always risky. But my two problem went something like this. It was TOO times TWO does not equal 1. And the good news is we know how to fix both parts of the two. But the TOO is my trumpeting call that says we were too hard, too complex, too bureaucratic, too regulated, too risk-averse, too stovepiped, and too analog for a digital world. And the TWO was, in many areas of the world which we were clearly leading before, today we'd say that gap has closed considerably, and arguably in some areas I'd say we're not leading. All right, so to be number one, I got to change both sides of that equation. And I haven't been talking about that this much recently because I think we've made some really good progress in areas. Let's just start with. We came out with a national security strategy and a national defense strategy. Chairman is close to having a national military strategy, and as chairman, joint operating procedures. And all of that has focused us and got us in alignment, which has been very helpful. And then Congress has been extraordinarily helpful as they've got back to regular order, fiscal order. And this is the first year in many that we've had a budget on time. And so with a stable, predictable budget, with the alignment between the national defense strategy, it's helped us, and it's helped us to alleviate some of the challenges that we had with that two problem. But we need to continue to do more in those efforts. I'll tell you, our airmen out in the field get it. The chief, as he goes around to every forum, and the secretary talk about empowerment. And they talk about how do we empower our airmen and bring their ideas and make them real and bring them to life. And so they are in alignment with the Secretary of Defense and the National Defense Strategy, and we're really witnessing some fantastic things. And every visit I make to the base and the Secretary and Chief make, we come away with these stories about, holy cow, let's just clear the obstacles from their success and let them see success, and they're hugely successful with what they're doing. We also have seen as a military the focus here over the last couple of years on readiness. And so make no doubt about it here. The message is we are ready, and we've been focused on that. The Secretary and the Chief put together a team. They swarmed against this readiness problem, and they looked at the problem differently and said, how can we move the readiness needle the fastest left? And so we've done just that. Within 10 months of the National Defense Strategy being published, we put together an effort to focus on the operational squadrons. You've all heard us talk about the 312 operational squadrons that we have in the Air Force, and that squadron, in essence, being the foundational unit for readiness and the ability to project power. Of that 312, there's 204 what we call pacing units. And those pacing squadrons are going to be the ones that get the resources, both in money and people, and parts and equipment, to make sure that those pacing units are ready first. And the goal of having 80% of those ready by 2020. And then we'll get to 312 by 2022, and then we'll get the rest of the Air Force ready by 2024. So we're on a drive to do that and a cadence to do that. Now, while we're focused on readiness, I'll also tell you that today's modernization is tomorrow's readiness. All right, and so we're laser focused on fielding that faster and smarter. And with recent authorities that Congress gave us, both what we call 804 and with the 5000 series rules changes and smart business practices, we've been able to save a substantial sum of money. $13 billion over the last 3 programs, right? That's 13 with a big B billion on programs like the TX, the UH-1, and the GPS. And with those delegated authorities that Congress gave us, we also got OSD to delegate programs back to the Air Force. And then we unleash our acquisition experts to do the things that they're capable of doing. And they've stripped off, and get this, they've stripped off 62 years against current major programs from what we were currently going to field them on. 62 years. So that means people are getting from space systems to radars to planes a whole lot faster today. And Dr. Roper and his team are determined to get us to 100 years in program savings. So we are focused on how do we bring capability to the warfighter faster and smarter. But we also got to take this newfound speed, and you hear me talk a lot about this pace of technology change, that we have to stay ahead of Moore's Law, right? We can't, if Moore's Law doubles every 2 years, I can't have capability development that fields in 10 years or 12 years or 15 years. I've got to stay in front of that Moore's Law equation. And so we're doing everything we can to do that from both requirements, acquisition, contracting, testing, to bring capability development faster. So that'll be, again, one of the big efforts that we continue to move out on. We'll do that, moving out and capability development in line with our allies and partners, of which we have some fantastic ones. And as I finish here today, I will spend a big part of the rest of the day with our Five Eyes partners on Capability Development Council, where we're bringing them into how do we develop capabilities together quickly, how do we partner, and how would we leverage the unique skills of all of our different nations, because we'll be in a fight together. So that will be spent the better part of my day today with our Five Eyes partners as we work through that capability development. Let me also talk about, as I talk about partners, a couple things that have happened and you all have been paying attention to. If we look out what General Brown, CQ Brown's been doing in the Pacific, we've had 2 massive typhoons that have gone through Pacifics. And what we found is those bonds are really strong between our allies and partners, and our airmen have been there, and they made a big difference in the 2 typhoons that went up to the Pacific in September and October. On the far end of the spectrum, CQ Brown and his team have been out at Red Flag, Alaska. And they've been working with our allies and partners out there on the high-end fight. And as they build those strong muscles together, we talk about what's important about relationships. It's a common dialogue and shared experiences and building relationships that ultimately work and build trust. And CQ and his team have done just that, and sharing tactics and techniques and procedures and making all of our air forces stronger. We saw that exact same thing happen also in Europe on the other end of the spectrum, where Trident Juncture just finished up here in Norway last week. We had 30 nations together strengthening the transatlantic bonds in a combined arms exercise out there. All of those are really important, to build those relationships across our allies and partners, and right in line with Secretary Mattis and his line of effort number 2. Another area I'd like to just briefly touch on today is what we're doing inside of our headquarters in the Pentagon. So we now have a new A5. As many of you knew, our A5 had been linked with the A3, and then we linked it with the A8, and now we've done an independent A5. It's led by Lieutenant General Tim Fay, and what you'll know is Tim Fay is an incredibly smart airman, right? But the purpose of our A5 is to do really 3 things: strategy, requirements, and integration. And bringing all those together in alignment, bringing those in alignment with our national defense strategy, looking at the joint fight at 2030, for example, and how would we fight as a joint team? And then from that, what's the design of the Air Force to meet that joint team's fight? And then how do we build the integrated requirements and the strategy to do that? And that's what Tim Fay has been charged to do. And we couldn't have picked a better leader with him and his team who were marching out to do just that. Tim will be leading our Air Force warfighting integration concept, what people you've heard talk to about AFWIC, and making that real as we grow that, the number of people who are, again, building the force design and the force we need for the force of the future. And that will certainly, as I mentioned briefly, will certainly include our allies and partners in that, because we're in this for the collective security of all of us. Let me, before we take some questions, also talk about something that I think is important for all of us to consider. I talked about how we're in alignment with the Secretary of Defense and the National Defense Strategy. And we're moving out as an Air Force and an airman at every level. But the other thing I think we need to do is think through what do we need to do as a nation to compete in the future as a whole of nation. And as Secretary Mattis talks, how do we increase the competitive space across all the levels of our government and across all aspects of our society? If you look just at recent examples, our adversaries aren't sitting on their heels. A few months back, China sailed its aircraft carrier into the South China Seas for some live fire drills, and they continue to challenge in that part of the world on a routine basis. Last month, they confirmed the designation of their new long-range bomber, strategic bomber, the H-20. In September, Russia carried out a war game with 300,000 personnel and 1,000 aircraft. Right? Consider the scale of that. And as I mentioned, the exercise in Trident Juncture that finished last week, Finland's prime minister is launching an investigation into GPS interference that impacted both military and civilian operations that they perceived was stemming from Russia. So Russia and China are certainly competing, and they have lots of power. And they also are, it's not just their military, it's the military civil fusion that's happening inside both of those countries. I give you a little homework assignment. Go Google Chinese autonomous boats. And when you do that, you'll see a little 90-second video of 56 boats that form different formations as they move across this area. And in the middle of the 90-second video, these boats form two letters, and the two letters that they form are military-civil fusion in that. And so it's clear to me that both China and Russia are in it to win it, and I contend we need to be also. And we know exactly how to do this. And let's use the gold standard of what happened to our nation on Apollo 11. Right? We started thinking of differently as a nation 12 years before that, on October 5th, 1957, when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik. And we as a nation got behind it. A few years after that, John F. Kennedy on May 25th, 1961 said, we're going to go to the moon and back. And in 8 years we did. So that in July 1969, we landed on the moon and came back. And you look at what happened and transpired in that 8-year period, we had 36 space launches. We went through Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, and Apollo 11 lands on the moon and comes back. So we know how to compete as a nation, but it was a whole of nation effort that did just that. And I contend that in this great power competition, we've got to get back to whole of nation efforts because that's what the adversaries are doing also. They have the plans to be in it for the long haul. They certainly have the resources, and I also think they have the will. So generations before us have done that. It's now our time to rally, to compete, to deter, and if need be, win in this great power competition. So before I open it up here for questions, let me just tell you, thanks for what all of you do in this national security environment, for all your help that have gotten us here where we are today. I do think this great power competition is going to require the long game, what Simon Sinek would call the infinite game, and it needs to be a whole government effort. But I also want people to know that America is ready tonight to fight and win, and each and every day we get more and more ready, and we do that because of your help here in the room. With that, let me stop and see what questions I can answer on your mind across. You name the issue. Thank you. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, everyone. So we've got microphones around the room, so please raise your hand. Let us know where you're from, and
I'll start down in front.
General Wilson, we have the opportunity to help Tyndall build back a base of the future. We represent that community. We understand that the FTU has had to move to Eglin and breaking up the other operational squadron. But what chance do they have to maybe fulfill the requirement of bedding down the 3 F-35 squadrons that the Air Force will need to do in the future?
Yeah, we're going to, the Secretary has asked the team to look, what were the best, as we rebuild Tyndall, what are the best options here for the future? And so nothing's really off the table right now. We're going to look at all kinds of options to see how we move Tyndall forward. The Vice President was down there recently. He talked about we're going to rebuild down here. We certainly are. And we're going to, I think, take a look at what mission sets best fit back into Tyndall. So I don't have a real answer right now to tell you here's exactly what we're going to do, but we are looking at it hard. The Secretary has asked for options, and I think our goal in the short term, right, let me tell you short term, is to make sure that the families down there, that we can help them as quickly as we can, that those impacted, that we have given them near-term options as we look for the longer-term solutions. But I think we'll have some options here in the December timeframe to flesh out what does Tyndall future look like. But I think we're still a couple months away from being able to answer that really to the type that you need. Yeah, John.
Morning, General. John Turpak, Air Force Magazine. Back in the spring testimony season, we heard from General Harris, General Holmes, that we have 55 fighter squadrons now. We need to go to 70. But then in September, the Secretary laid out the force we need, which only calls for 62 fighter squadrons. I wonder if you could talk about what was the calculus that scoped down the number of fighter squadrons? Was it that other kinds of things like bombers or RPAs are more important? Or is it that you felt like you couldn't supply the maintainers or pilots for that? Talk to us about how that calculus changed and evolved.
Yeah, John, let me speak briefly on the numbers that came out on the Air Force we need. As people, first of all, we were asked by Congress when the Secretary and the Chief last spring testified, tell us about the force that you need. So we went back with our A9 folks and our analysts and looked at the future war plans, what the force that we had, and were able to come back to Congress and say, this is the force we need, and we think it's 386 squadrons. What I'll also tell you, John, is as we continue to refine that number, is we need to also take into account new operating concepts. So we think that number is based on looking at war plans, looking at the program force we have to meet those war plans. But what it doesn't factor in yet, and we're working at, is what are the new operating concepts to be able to fight differently, as you've heard the Chief talk about new. So what's the new, and what will that do to change that number? And so that's where on the message we think we've been saying for a while the Air Force was too small to do all the things the nation needs it to do. What we also think to get to that number is we need to have a stable, predictable budget. We need to have congressional support to be able to grow the force that we need, and it's going to take some time. We know that this isn't going to happen. This isn't a 1 year or 5 year. This is a long-term thing to be able to build to that force that we need. And then we have to be able to clearly articulate the why, and that anything different than that we call risk, right? It's risk, so it's something that we're going to go to the American public and to Congress and say, here's the delta that we have today, the force we have, and here's the force that we think we need, and in that area, the difference is risk. So to answer specifically, John, I can't give you a specific, this is why we went from X to Y. What I will tell you is we're going to continue to refine all of our numbers across all of our major platforms and weapon systems as we look to design the force that we need for the future.
So will that 386 be revisited, do you think, every year or every 10 years?
I think John, I think there will be certainly some relooking at that number, and again, a refinement of that number. But that number we have, 386, is the best we have today based on the known plans that we have, with the known budget that we have, to be able, I would say it's a strategy-driven force that we're trying to build to, and and the reason we came out with that is because Congress specifically asked us, tell me the size of the force that you need, and so that's our best analysis today. There's a question in the way back.
Thank you. Good morning. Sandra Irwin, Space News. You mentioned in your opening comments about acquisition and the necessity to accelerate some programs, go faster. I was wondering what your assessment is on some of the specific areas like the Space Rapid Capabilities Office that the Air Force now has, and the Space and Missile Systems Center now has a 2.0 reorganization. So I'm curious what you think of how that's coming along and if they're actually doing things that you can say are measurable progress. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. As everybody in this room knows, we have the world's greatest Space Force, right? Make no doubt about it. The challenge before us is that our adversaries have seen how important space is to us and everything that we do militarily, and literally everything that we do as a nation, from using GPS for ATM machines to the communication capability to weather, happens through space. So the goal is, how do we get even faster and better in space? The efforts we have underway is to clearly align space as a warfighting domain, and then we connect it to a warfighter. That we have a space operating force that's part of that. That we have to keep completely connected the acquisition piece and the warfighter moving forward, and then we have to also do that same thing to continue to deepen the relationship we have with the intelligence community, because that will be fundamental going forward. Some of the efforts underway that you've mentioned, there's General Thompson down in the Space and Missile Center has got SMC 2.0, and it's his design, and how do I take that organization and basically change the culture of it and change it so that it can produce capability at the speed of relevance and move that fast. And they got an incredible force of experienced people who know the space business there in LA doing just that. We also modeled, just like we do the Rapid Capabilities Office, have a Space Rapid Capabilities Office with the same fundamental concept in mind, and why both of those organizations are successful. First and foremost is about culture, because they're built, designed around the warfighter and to produce capability at the speed of relevance. They're about small, empowered teams. So they have the right contracting, the right acquisition folks, the right program manager, the right budgeter, the right tester, the right operator on this small, empowered team. They have very thin oversight. Right? So today, the oversight happens at the RCO and the Space RCO from the secretary, the chief, the service acquisition executive, and OSDs, R&E, and ANS. And when they approve something, it goes down to Mr. Walden for RCO, and he turns to his small empowered team and says, go, and they produce. And so that same model is taking place at the Space RCO at Kirtland Air Force Base, and they're already delivering capability. So we think between the Space RCO and SMC that we're on a good cadence to be able to bring the capability we're going to need for the Space Force that we need even faster and smarter. They're doing some great stuff there. Let me go over here, then I'll come back over here.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi, Valerie Encino with Defense News. You mentioned the importance of budget stability, but it looks like next year the department is going to have to take a cut, going from the $733 billion that was planned for the budget down to $700 billion, if I'm correct. Can you talk a little bit about how that impacts the Air Force? What is the service going to have to sacrifice, and can you guys fulfill the national defense strategy at that level?
Well, yeah, first of all, we don't have a budget number yet. There's been discussions on what that is. And so we're working through, as we do every year, impacts of the budget. So when what we call program budget review time. We're in the middle of that with the budget that was at 7:33, and now we're making excursions off of that to see what that would be. So I don't have anything concrete to tell you. We're in the midst of that. We expect to get a budget number here in the next early December. We just typically when we get those, and then we'll see how that impacts us moving forward. But we were. What I would say is that we had budget stability is really important, and getting a return to fiscal order is really important, and not just for 1 year, for multiple years. To have a budget that we can plan on and program to is going to be critical for us moving forward. Back corner over here.
Hi, sir. Courtney Albin with Inside Defense. You mentioned that the 386 Squadron process will impact readiness and hopefully improve readiness. But in the near term, the guidance is to increase readiness for certain aircraft by the end of FY19. Realistically, does the Air Force need additional funds, whether through a reprogramming, in order to achieve that? And can you give us more specifics on what the Air Force is doing to get there?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we've been focused since the end of our readiness sprint on our 204 pacing squadrons to get all of them where they need to be by 2020. The Secretary of Defense has asked us specifically to get the F-16, the F-22, and the F-35 above 80% MC rate by the end of this year. And so we're focused on, with our sustainment folks, with our maintenance folks and operating folks on the plan to do exactly that. And so whether we drive down, well, here's an example. We've increased the number of maintainers. A year ago, if I were speaking here, we would have been 4,000 maintainers short. We've closed that gap, and by 1 December, we'll have closed it to 0 in terms of the maintainers to be able to produce sorties. What are the key parts that we're missing? Can we identify those? Do we have a plan and the money in place to be able to get the parts and the people to fly the sorties that we need and get the hours that we need across those 3 fleets is what we're working on today to build those plans. It will take, we'll have to shift resources from other areas to be able to get that. And again, we're refining where that comes from. So whether the weapon system sustainment, whether where we get those funds to be able to prioritize those efforts. But we're marching out to meet the Secretary's goals to get an 80% MC rate across those 3 platforms. But we're also focused on improving the overall readiness of our 204 pacing squadrons. And so we meet routinely and I'm the guy who gets us to chair the meeting on where are the right, as people come into our Air Force, are we getting them to the right squadrons? What's the manning? What's the funding level of those squadrons? Because those 204 pacing squadrons are the ones, that's what I'll call our blunt force. That's the halt force, right? We've got to, when we get the phone call, those squadrons have to be ready. And so we're getting those squadrons ready first. I don't have the specific figure on that we need to shift. We're still working those numbers.
So we have time for one more question.
There's one in the back who's been trying twice. He's got up and thought he had the mic and it's like, ugh. Yeah.
Good morning, sir. Stu Kowal from General Atomics. Thank you for your time this morning. The National Defense Strategy clearly directs to prepare for the great power competition, but it also says to maintain pressure on the current violent extremist organization fights that are going on. Could you share with us at the corporate level, the Air Force corporate level, your thinking on kind of the weight of effort in terms of resources or emphasis as you look to the future to maintain those two objectives?
Well, there's actually more than that, right? So I need to be able to compete, deter, and win, first of all, against great powers. I'll call that China and Russia. And then to be able to deter conflict and fight and win in case of a North Korea or Iran scenario. And then I have to be able to hold violent extremists at risk wherever they are across the globe. I would tell you that what's changed with this National Defense Strategy is for the last 25 years until the National Defense Strategy, I would say the weight of effort was against violent extremists. That's what we were doing. Now I'd say the weight of effort has shifted considerably, and the weight of effort is how do I prepare to be ready for great power competition, and I'll focus primarily on China and Russia to start with. And then if I do that and do that right, I should be able to also then keep places like North Korea and Iran to be able to accomplish those if need be. But I also realize that across the globe, we're not seeing a relenting of violent extremists, and we've got to be able to keep that, keep a weight of effort across that. But certainly it's shifted from that to great power competition and the high-end fight against a competitor like China or Russia. Thank you. Thanks, Denise.
So General Wilson has been one of our speakers here at AFA for so many times that we've ran out of gifts to give him because he's received all the other ones. So we figured you could always use a workout shirt, sir. So here's your Airman for Life T-shirt. If anybody else needs one, just come on. You know where to find them. So thank you again, sir.
Thank you, Denise.
I really appreciate it. I'd just like to take a quick moment and remind everyone that registration's open for Air Warfare Symposium, sunny Florida, in February. So please get online and register soon. We'd also like to take a moment to thank everyone here for attending, and especially to our sponsors who really help AFA be able to accomplish our mission of educating, advocating, and supporting the Air Force and a dominant defense industry. So. On that note, if you are interested in corporate sponsorship and sponsoring this breakfast in particular, Fred Ullman is here, our Director of Corporate Relations, so please see him. And thanks again, everyone. Have a happy and safe Thanksgiving, and we'll see you at the next breakfast, which is scheduled for January. We're working on our speaker, and we'll get the word out here shortly. So thanks again.